We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Garland Nixon. Caitlin Johnstone has a great article in RT in which she says a U.S. corporate media wastes no time using UFO report to promote arms race. It seems like they can always find a way to make more money off U.S. arms. The UFO, are the aliens here? To make more money for the Pentagon. Joining us, we have journalist and political analyst, the one and only Caleb Maupin. Caleb, welcome back to the Critical Hour.
Sure. Glad to be here, as always.
So, Caleb, is that why the aliens came? Because Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman needs a bigger profit. What are your thoughts on all of this? I think Caitlin Johnstone has a great point.
Well, she has a very good point. But I think, we ought to examine this a little further because there's a number of layers we can come at this. First things first, right? UFO just means unidentified flying object. Means there's something in the sky and we do not know what it is. Now, it is a little bit strange that in the public mind, if you say UFO, immediately people start thinking about space aliens and little green men and all kinds of science fiction movies and stuff. But none of that is implied in the story, right? It just means there's something in the sky and we do not know what it is. Throughout human history, human beings have often seen things in the sky, not known what they are. In ancient times, people thought maybe it was angels or it was some kind of spiritual thing. In modern times, people are talking about aliens or enemy spacecraft or enemy aircraft or weather balloons or whatever, right? That's really all there is to it. But the UFO flying saucer fixation really starts in the United States in 1947 in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. And you have to remember, the Great Depression had come before the war. In the USA, we had just been through this big war. Lots of people had died. The atomic bomb had been used. And suddenly the United States is having a booming economy in 1947, right? We have a booming economy. That post-war economic boom is starting. The suburbs are lighting up. The factories are hiring. Wages for industrial workers are higher than they've ever been. But underneath it all, there's this uneasiness in the public. There's many people who've been through a traumatic war. They've been through a depression. And suddenly everything is supposedly getting well, but there's this fear of nuclear war. And in that, in this weird psychological, geopolitical moment for the United States, where suddenly the economy is doing really well, we have this moment where suddenly people are talking about flying saucers and UFO sightings. And there's many, many interesting aspects of this. There was a bluegrass song that came out around the time the flying saucer craze started. And the bluegrass song, it actually has a verse. It says, "Though the war may be through, there's unrest and trouble brewing, but these flying saucers may be just a sign that if peace doesn't come, it will be the end of some. So repent today, you're running out of time." And the UFO scare was almost like an aspect of the American psyche trying to deal with everything that had just gone on and trying to make sense out of the global situation. You get into the 70s, UFOs are associated with hippies and counterculture, right? And it's associated with kind of the new left and skepticism. Jimmy Carter is running for president, you'll recall, and says he believes in UFOs and that when he gets into office, he's going to reveal all the secret UFO information. And of course, he doesn't do that. And now, ever since Trump has been in office, suddenly there's this renewed interest in the whole thing. And you have to look at this and see there's aspects of American culture here. There's aspects of people being suspicious of the government. There's a lot of confusion. And on some level, the whole UFO thing is very, very easy for all kinds of people with many different agendas to push and shove in any way that they really please. So Caitlin Johnstone, in her article, she's arguing that this is the military-industrial complex saying that there is a threat and that we need a bigger budget. And she may be onto something. But that doesn't really speak to the fact that within the wider culture in the United States, the UFO phenomenon has been kind of an indicator of some of the deep confusion in our society. Look, there was a book published about 10 or 20 years ago that tried to allege that all of the UFO sightings and all of that was done by Russia, and that the little green men were Soviet Soviet prisoners who were very short, and that it was an experimental spacecraft done by Stalin. That's laughable, okay? But I saw, Jon Stewart and The Daily Show promoting this book. It was getting mainstream reviews. No evidence to back up any of the claims in the book. But it was simply presented here that the UFOs and the little green men, the flying saucers were all a big plot from the evil Soviet Union led by Stalin. And it was being paraded out in mainstream media as if it was fact. There are so many aspects of this weird conspiracy theory, urban legend aspect of American culture that yes, people can manipulate it for their own ends, but it is speaking to something deeper about the American psyche.
Well, you bring in an interesting angle, and this is just sheerly from a logic perspective. So there's something that is unidentified. Let's say there's an unidentified phenomenon, right? Well, we can assume that we could say, well, it could be humans from another time zone. It could be someone from another dimension who's right along where we are, and they have this creatures or excuse me, these whatever they are, have the individual to cross into our dimension and out of our dimension, and they're not from another planet, they're from right here. It could be that these are not spaceships, that they are in fact creatures, that it is in fact some kind of a life form. My point being, we could go on and on and on with that of if there's an unidentified object, all of the possibilities, and all of those are just as credible as the other. So to simply say, well, it could be this, or this, but let's go with an alien life form from another planet, and therefore, hey, we better spend some more money, or we better do something, or we better take any action whatsoever, forget about the money, based on one of the many assumptions that it could be. I would argue that until we can narrow it down to one of those assumptions, it doesn't make sense to act on any of them as though they are the one that we should believe. If that makes any sense, Caleb.
Oh, absolutely. And again, look, there have always been urban legends, right? I mean, you can talk about Bigfoot. You can talk about, the abominable snowman. There have always been paranormal theories and urban legends, myths. When I was in the Middle East, people were very, very paranoid, I would say, about the jinn, these magical, creatures, kind of ghost-like fire creatures that are widely believed in, right? Every culture has their myths. Every culture has their legends. And the more you investigate this stuff, some people get really into debunking this kind of thing and showing that it's false. And other people say, look, there is some of that stuff we just don't know about, and we just aren't going to know, and that every society produces these kinds of myths. But the thing is, when people are pushing a political agenda onto these kinds of myths, that's when it gets particularly dangerous. And let's be real about this, okay? Now, in the 1950s, when the UFO craze got going, there were two individuals who were promoting the UFO craze for their own ends. And those individuals were tied to American intelligence. One of those individuals was Wilhelm Reich, the psychoanalyst who fled Nazi Germany. He started teaching at the New School University, and he was a crackpot psychoanalyst. He had this magical machine he would give his clients, and he was claiming that he was in touch with space aliens and ripping people off. And you can read about Wilhelm Reich and how this man, who was tied to American intelligence circles, was promoting the UFO scare to manipulate his followers and hustle people for money. Another individual who was really into the whole UFO scare and, made a career around it. And is the individual known as L. Ron Hubbard, right? The Church of Scientology, UFOs and all that is a big part of their beliefs. And Hubbard admits that he developed the methods of Scientology when working as a naval intelligence officer. UFOlogy is a big part of their beliefs as well. And he has, some intelligence connections. So when these kind of myths and beliefs and urban legends develop in the popular culture, people within the power structure will try to use them for their own ends, no doubt about it.
And here's the other part that I think about. I'm a big person on timing, so the U.S. goes forever, and whatever videos they have, whatever information they have on you, it's for years and years. People are like, let us see it. Nope, can't see it. No, there's nothing there, right? All of a sudden, a year and a half ago, they come up with this thing called the Space Force, which is going to be very, very expensive, and we're going to have a Space Force to do whatever Space Force does. I don't think it's coincidental that when the Space Force comes around, and there's some pushback because people are looking at the many problems that we have and the people struggling and not, having food and getting thrown out, et cetera. And at that time, something comes along that would, let's face it, it would justify the Space Force. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm taking a position that the information that they're giving us is true or false. I don't know what it is, true or false. I'm not taking a position. I'm just saying that let's say it is true or it is false, whatever the case, the timing that it's coming out when the Space Force is getting pushed back, at least to me, is rather conspicuous. Your thoughts, Caleb?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And, I thought in a lot of ways when I saw the Space Force that in some ways it was a military recruiting drive. You know, the military is not exactly an appealing career to a lot of young men right now. But, if you can convince young men that joining the U.S. military, they might get to be Captain Kirk or they might get to be Luke Skywalker and it's not going to be Jarhead. I thought it might be a successful recruiting operation. When I saw the press conference, I thought, there are a lot of high school aged sci-fi kids who are, buying their MAGA hats today and very excited about joining the Space Force. But that said, the Space Force has got to fight against somebody. And while it's stated pretty clearly in the statements around it, the Space Force is meant to, compete with Russia and China and other forces here on Earth for, control of the moon and other areas and control of resources that could be acquired from space and dominating. It's about competing with people on Earth. Fighting space aliens sounds far more exciting, doesn't it?
So ultimately, in our discussion, we got about a minute or so left. A lot of this still, if you talk about it from the perspective of, the shock doctrine, no matter what the case, it still seems like this is something that is being, in fact, used for, the purposes of the empire one way or the other. With true, false, or whatever the case, they kind of, everything they use as a tool. Caleb, we got about a minute.
They never let a good crisis go to waste. That is one thing that observers are pretty aware of.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've been talking with Caleb Maupin. You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Garland Nixon. More on the other side. Stay tuned.